I was the most notoriously cruel lady in the capital, forcing my husband to kneel and put on my shoes, making our 5-year-old son serve me tea every morning without daring to complain. Then, deep in the night, a line of blood-red characters dripped into being in the empty air, foretelling that I would kneel outside our gates in a pouring rain, my leg broken, left to die by the roadside. I scrambled to become gentler than I had ever been, but the more I tried to hold on, the closer the one fated to replace me drew to our door. I just didn't know yet whether he would be the end of everything or the key to an entirely different fate. I am Jiying, Lady of the Song Residence, married into this general's household 6 years ago. This morning I sat on the couch, arms crossed, watching Song Zhao fumble as he carried a cup of tea to me, the tea sloshing onto his sleeve, too afraid to complain. I took a satisfied sip and glanced over at Song Yan, bent low to put on my shoes like an obedient servant. 6 years now, and I still liked it this way, watching father and son despise me while still bowing to serve me. Suddenly, lines of blood-red characters appeared in the air before my eyes. Book of Heavens, will the lady of the Song House, cruel of temperament, oppressing her husband and heir, is destined to be cast out, her leg broken, left to wander and die by the roadside. The teacup in my hand fell and shattered on the floor. Song Zhao flinched back a step, his eyes a mix of fear and wariness. Song Yan straightened, frowning at me, his voice cold. "What's wrong with you?" I stared at the empty air before me where the red characters still lingered, not yet faded, my throat too tight to speak. Song Zhao gripped his father's sleeve and whispered, "Mother's angry again." I wanted to explain, but I knew no one would believe me. I waved them both away, my voice trembling in a way it rarely did. Song Yan studied me for a few more seconds, his gaze searching, before leading our son away, leaving me alone amid the shattered porcelain. That night I couldn't sleep. In the dead of night, the red characters appeared again, stretching this time into a full scene, myself kneeling outside the Song gates in a driving rain, my mourning robes torn, driven off like a beggar by the household guards. I bolted upright, cold sweat soaking my back. Moonlight fell through the window. I reached toward the empty space where the characters had just vanished, but found only silent darkness. I wondered whether this was an omen or a nightmare, but the realism of it chilled me too deeply to dismiss. At dawn, I dug through an old wooden chest and pulled out this year's calendar. I compared it against the hazy number still lodged in my mind from the night before. The deadline written in the Book of Heavens, Will was less than a year away. My hand shook so hard the calendar nearly slipped to the floor. If this truly was the fate awaiting me, I had little time left. I sank into a chair, staring out the window at Song Zhao playing alone in the courtyard, a wave of panic rising in me unlike anything I'd felt in 6 years. At noon, when it came time for tea, Song Zhao moved out of habit to carry the tray. I stood first and took it from his hands myself. "Let mother do it." Song Zhao froze, his eyes wide as though he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. He stepped back, not daring to accept the compliment or ask why. I poured the tea into 2 cups, my hands clumsy from 6 years of never having done this myself. Tea spilled across the table. I scrambled to wipe it up, all trace of my usual noble poise gone. Song Yan walked in just then, pausing in the doorway, silently taking in the scene for a long moment. I looked up and met his familiar, searching gaze. "You're strange today, my lady." I forced a smile, scrambling for an excuse. "Just wanted to change things up." He didn't press further, but his eyes lingered on my tea-stained hands a moment longer, as if trying to uncover something unusual hiding beneath the surface. That evening, alone in my room, the red characters appeared once more, this time with a new line that made my heart sink. Another will appear, taking the lady's place, claiming her husband and heir entirely. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, my hand clenched around my sleeve. It wasn't only my own cruelty that would cost me my position. Someone else was already waiting to step into their lives. I gritted my teeth, vowing to change whatever it took to keep this fate from coming true. In the days that followed, I began to watch every word I spoke. I stopped shouting at the servants, stopped snapping at Song Zhao whenever he made a mistake. The household staff exchanged whispers, unable to understand my sudden shift. Some muttered it was surely an act, others speculated I was scheming something. I caught fragments of it, gritted my teeth, and kept trying, though the words still stung. At dinner that night, I sat closer to Song Zhao than usual and set food in his bowl. He looked at the meat, then up at me, his eyes wary. "What do you want, mother?" The blunt question from a 5-year-old struck me silent. I had meant to answer with a gentle smile, but my throat closed instead. Across the table, Song Yan's chopsticks paused mid-air, his eyes quietly taking in both of us, saying nothing, missing nothing. Late that night, I sat alone at my desk, staring at the hands that had spent so long pointing and commanding others. I thought back on every sharp word I'd ever spoken, every frightened glance from the servants whenever I appeared. Perhaps I had driven everyone away long before the Book of Heavens will ever appeared. The moment that thought crossed my mind, the red characters flickered into view again, as if to remind me the deadline was closing in, waiting for no one's regret. The next morning, I overheard 2 servants talking in the hallway. One mentioned that Song Yan had ordered a private courtyard prepared, saying a special guest would soon be staying at the residence. I froze behind a screen, my heart pounding. Someone else was coming exactly as the Book of Heavens Will had warned. I gripped the doorframe, trying to stay calm, though unease had already taken root and would not let go. That evening, Song Yan came to my room and announced simply, "In a few days, someone will be staying here for a while. Prepare yourself." I asked who it was. He only answered, "An old benefactor," then left without another word. I stood alone in the room, staring into the darkened window, my mind in turmoil. The red characters of the Book of Heavens will appeared once more that night, just one final line. He is coming. 3 days later, a bridal palanquin stopped before the Song gates. I stood on the steps, my heart pounding as the curtain lifted. A slender young man stepped out, his robes plain but his features unmistakably refined, his eyes lowered politely, his steps light as though afraid to disturb anyone. Song Yan stepped forward to steady his arm, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "Such a long journey, you should have sent word ahead so I could have met you myself." I stood watching, something sharp twisting in my chest that I couldn't name, my hand gripping my sleeve until my knuckles went white. Song Yan introduced him briefly. "This is Muking. Last year I was ambushed deep in the forest and he risked his life to save mine. I've carried that debt ever since." Muking bowed to me, his voice soft. "My lady, thank you for taking me in. I won't trouble you for long." I returned the courtesy with a strained smile, studying his face for anything suspicious, but found only a gentleness that was almost too convincing, his brows delicately arched, his frame as fragile as if a breeze could knock him over. In my mind, the words, "the one," that the Book of Heavens Will had spoken of kept echoing. Song Zhao peeked out from behind me, eyes wide with curiosity, and asked shyly, "Who are you, big brother? Why are you coming to our house?" Muking smiled gently and crouched to the boy's eye level. "I'm Muking. I'll be staying here for a while. I hope you'll look after me, young master." Song Zhao stared at him for a moment, then broke into a grin and ran to grab his hand as though they'd known each other for years, chattering about all his toys. I watched, a chill settling in my chest. My son had never warmed to a stranger this fast before. That night, Song Yan personally led Muking on a tour of the residence, pointing out every corner of the garden, every path, every ancient tree. I stood far off in the hallway, watching them talk and laugh, Song Yan's laughter rare enough that I barely recognized it as my own husband's voice. 6 years married, and I had never once seen him laugh so freely with anyone, not even with me, not even in our earliest days. I gripped the pillar beside me and turned away before they could notice I'd been watching. Deep in the night, the Book of Heavens will appear again, its words sharper and crueler than ever. Muking, the one fated to replace the Lady of Song, cherished and utterly trusted by both husband and heir. I clutched the blanket, a hand seeming to close around my throat. This was no longer a vague prediction. The name was now written in plain, undeniable strokes. I gritted my teeth, telling myself I had to keep my distance, even as a nameless fear kept coiling tighter inside me. The next morning, I deliberately avoided Muking, claiming kitchen duties to skip breakfast with the others. But crossing the courtyard, I still saw him sitting with Song Zhao under a tree, carefully folding a white paper crane. Song Zhao squealed with delight and threw his arms around Muking in thanks, his bright laughter ringing across the garden. I stood behind a pillar, watching in silence, my hand clenched white around my sleeve, a hollow feeling settling in, lonely in my own home. At noon, Song Yan sought me out, asking whether Muking's accommodations were adequate, whether anything more needed to be prepared. I answered curtly, avoiding his eyes for fear of revealing my unease. He frowned. "You don't like him? If something's bothering you, just say so." I shook my head, keeping my voice steady. "It's nothing. I just need time to adjust." He studied me a moment longer, that familiar searching look in his eyes, then let it go and walked away without pressing further. By late afternoon, I found Song Zhao boasting to the servants about the paper crane Muking had made him, calling him Brother Muking over and over, forgetting entirely about his nap. An old nursemaid nearby remarked to someone next to her, "Look how attached the young master is, like he's found a long-lost relative." I heard every word, my steps faltering in the long hallway, a feeling settling over me that something was slipping through my fingers and I was powerless to hold on. At dinner that night, Song Zhao chattered on about Muking teaching him paper folding, occasionally turning to ask Muking's opinion instead of mine, as he always used to. Song Yan joined in too, recounting old stories from his army days, the table livelier than I'd ever seen it. I sat in silence, eating without tasting a bite, feeling like an outsider at my own family's table. Muking glanced my way now and then, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he lowered his eyes again, saying nothing. After dinner, I lingered in the empty hallway, hoping for a chance to speak with Muking alone to probe further into his true background. But the moment I opened my mouth, he bowed quickly, his voice humble. "I am merely someone repaying a debt of life. I would never presume anything more. Please don't misunderstand and think ill of me, my lady." The words stopped me mid-thought. I didn't know whether to believe him. As he lowered his head, a flash of something bitter crossed his eyes, too brief for me to read clearly before he turned away. That night, the Book of Heavens will revealed a new line that chilled me to the bone, each character seeming to carve itself into my mind. 3 months from now, the lady will uncover a shocking secret about Muking's true identity, but it will already be too late to stop what follows. I read the line over and over, fear mixing with an irresistible curiosity. What kind of secret could push things this far? I resolved to begin quietly investigating from the next day on. I couldn't simply sit and wait for fate to knock. Early the next morning, I secretly followed Muking out of the residence and watched him stop at a small, quiet tea house on a deserted street corner, meeting a stranger dressed like a guard from some other household. The two spoke in low voices for a long while, their tense manner nothing like Muking's usual gentle demeanor within the walls of the Song residence. I hid behind a moss-covered wall, my heart pounding. Who was Muking, really, and what was he hiding behind that fragile exterior? Hidden behind the wall, I caught fragments of their conversation. The stranger said, "The 3-month deadline is almost up, those above are pressing." Muking bowed his head, his voice trembling. "I need more time, please don't rush this." Before I could hear more, footsteps sounded behind me, and I slipped away through a narrow alley before I could be discovered. Back in my room, my heart still raced. Those vague, fragmented words only deepened the suspicion taking root in me. At noon, I casually asked Muking about his family and hometown. He answered evasively, his eyes sliding away. "My family is from far away. My parents passed young, there's nothing much to tell." The answer came too smoothly, as if rehearsed. I nodded as though I believed him, but committed every strange detail to memory. How could someone claiming to have no family have a secret meeting with a stranger at a deserted tea house? That afternoon, Song Zhao ran up and clung to Muking's leg, begging to be carried on his back through the garden. Muking laughed gently and crouched down to let the boy climb on, walking slowly among the trees. I watched from a distance, warmth and ache mingling in my chest. That should have been Song Yan's place or mine. Song Yan came to stand beside me, his eyes following the same two figures, an unreadable expression crossing his face. JR has grown quite attached to Muking, I said, keeping my voice light. Song Yan didn't look at me, only answered flatly, "Children take easily to kind people." The words stung, as if I had never once been kind enough for my own son to feel close to me. I opened my mouth to say more, then thought better of it, turning and walking away, leaving Song Yan alone to watch Muking and Song Zhao disappear behind the bamboo grove. That night, the Book of Heavens will reveal a new line. Muking carries a hidden burden. His true identity is tied to a great upheaval that once shook the entire court. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. This wasn't only a rivalry for affection anymore. Muking might be a genuine danger to the entire household. I clutched the blanket tightly, unsure whether to warn Song Yan at once or continue investigating quietly, afraid that speaking up now would only make me look jealous without cause. The next morning, I decided to search the small chest in Muking's sitting room while he was out. Beneath a neatly folded layer of clothes, I found a jade pendant carved in the shape of a phoenix, the unmistakable emblem of some powerful clan I'd never encountered in the capital. My hand trembled as I hastily put it back exactly as it was, my heart racing. Who was this man who claimed to have no family at all? Just as I stepped out of the room, I found Muking standing right at the door, his eyes going cold for an instant before he masked it. "Is there something you needed in my room, my lady?" His voice remained gentle, but something sharp lay beneath it. I forced myself to stay calm, claiming I'd lost something, then hurried away. I could feel his gaze following me the entire length of the hallway, a chill running down my spine that refused to fade. That night, Song Zhao suddenly ran a high fever, throwing the household into chaos. I held him close, my hands shaking as I called for someone to fetch the physician. Muking came running at once, kneeling by the bed to wipe the boy's forehead with practiced ease, as though he'd done this many times before. Song Yan stood beside them, his worried eyes never leaving his son, glancing at Muking now and then as though relying on his presence more than mine. I stood off to the side, feeling abandoned in the very moment I feared the most. The physician arrived, diagnosed a common chill, prescribed medicine, and left. Muking personally brewed the medicine and fed it to Song Zhao spoonful by spoonful with endless patience. Delirious with fever, the boy murmured "Brother Muking" over and over, each word twisting the knife in my chest. Song Yan watched the scene, letting out a relieved sigh. Thank goodness Muking is here. Hearing those words felt like a blade cutting straight through me. I turned away in silence, hiding my reddened eyes. At midnight, once Song Zhao's fever had broken and he'd fallen asleep, I stepped out into the hallway for air and happened to overhear Song Yan and Muking talking in the courtyard. "You take better care of JR than I do," Song Yan said, a note of guilt in his voice. Muking answered softly, "I simply have more free time, that's all, don't think too much of it, young master." I stood behind the screen, listening, my chest tightening at that familiar, intimate address. It made me realize just how far the distance between myself and the two of them had truly grown. The next morning, the Book of Heavens will reveal an urgent new warning. In half a month, Muking's secret will be exposed, bringing great upheaval upon the entire Song household. I read it, my hand trembling so badly I knocked over the leftover cup of medicine on the table. Half a month, too short to uncover the truth, yet long enough for everything to spiral entirely out of control if I didn't act now. I decided to risk asking Song Yan directly about the phoenix-carved jade pendant I had found. The moment he heard, his expression changed completely. He gripped my shoulders and demanded urgently, "Where did you see this?" His eyes held a fear I had never witnessed before. Before I could answer, frantic footsteps sounded in the courtyard, and a servant burst in, breathless. "It's bad, soldiers with a military order are at the gate, looking for Muking." The entire household fell into chaos as a line of soldiers stood rigidly before the gate, their commander reading aloud a decree seeking the capture of a descendant of a condemned traitor hiding somewhere in the capital. I stood beside Song Yan, gripping his sleeve, my heart pounding without pause. Muking stood pressed behind a pillar, pale as paper, his hands shaking beyond his control. Song Yan stepped forward to face the officer, his voice cold but steady. "There is no such person in this household. I ask you to withdraw." The officer narrowed his eyes at Song Yan, his voice full of suspicion. "Are you certain of that, General? Someone reported seeing a suspicious figure entering and leaving this residence several times." The air grew taut as a drawn bowstring. I glanced at Muking, saw him lower his eyes, lips pressed tight, saying nothing. Song Zhao clutched my sleeve, frightened, burying himself against me. In the end, the officer withdrew his troops, but not without a cold warning. "We will return in 3 days to search this place." That night, the entire household gathered in the study for a private meeting. Muking dropped to his knees before Song Yan, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry for hiding this from you, young master. My past is not as clean as it seems." Song Yan gripped his fists, his voice hard. "Tell me plainly, who are you, truly?" I stood in the corner, my heart racing as I waited for an answer that would decide the fate of the entire household, and would also finally answer the threat the Book of Heavens will had warned of all along. Muking lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. "I am the last surviving son of the Moo clan, a family falsely accused of treason 10 years ago. My parents were executed and I escaped only because of a loyal old servant." The room fell utterly silent. I remembered the phoenix scarf jade pendant, suddenly understanding it as an imperial token once granted to the Moo family before their downfall. Song Yan gripped Muking's hand, his voice low. "So it wasn't chance that you saved me in that forest." Muking nodded, his voice trembling. "I knew you were the only one I could trust, General. That's why I risked everything to come here and seek shelter." Hearing this, something in me eased slightly. Muking hadn't been scheming after all. He was simply a man with nowhere else to turn. But in that very moment, the Book of Heavens will flickered into my mind with a new line. "This sympathy will only push husband and heir further from the lady." The next morning, Song Yan decided to personally seek an audience at court, hoping to clear the Moo family's name using old evidence he'd gathered during his years in the military. Before leaving, he took my hand and said, "Keep an eye on Muking and JR these next few days. Don't let anyone discover him." I nodded in agreement, though a bitter feeling lingered. He had entrusted Muking's protection to me as if it were simply the natural thing to do. 3 heavy days passed. I hid Muking in a sealed room behind the garden, bringing him meals myself each day to avoid the servants' notice. During those quiet visits, Muking slowly opened up, telling me of his childhood before the tragedy, of the gentle mother he'd lost. Listening to him, I realized he wasn't the villain I'd imagined, only a lonely soul swept into a current he couldn't escape. Song Zhao discovered where Muking was hiding and began sneaking toys to him whenever I wasn't watching. I caught the two of them playing together in the small, dim room, torn between fear of discovery and being moved by the boy's genuine affection for Muking. I sat down beside them and for the first time felt no trace of jealousy, only shared worry for the safety of all 3 of us. On the 3rd night, exactly as the officer had warned, the soldiers returned to search the residence. I panicked and pulled Muking toward the back exit, my heart pounding fit to burst. At the most critical moment, Song Yan returned just in time with an imperial pardon he had secured from the court, stopping the troops right at the gate. I watched from a distance, breathing a sigh of relief as Song Yan raised the decree high, his voice ringing out to declare the Moo family fully exonerated. After the ordeal, Muking knelt before both of us, bowing again and again in gratitude. Song Yan helped him up, his voice much lighter now. "From now on you can live openly, no more hiding." Watching this, my feelings tangled, the danger had passed. But my unease over my place in this family remained, if anything grown heavier now that Muking could rightfully stay at the residence indefinitely. That night, the Book of Heavens will appear again, its tone entirely different this time. The danger of identity has passed, but the true danger of the heart has only just begun. Reading it, my chest tightened. The greatest threat all along hadn't been Muking's secret. It was the quiet affection blooming between him and both father and son, something even I felt powerless to stop. Alone at my desk late that night, I thought back to 6 years ago, the day I first came to the Song residence as a bride, when my heart had once stirred for the cold young man who never returned my feelings. Perhaps it was that old wound that had built the shell of arrogance and control I'd worn ever since, hiding a deep insecurity. Now, watching Muking steadily win over both husband and son, I realized I was repeating that same old pain, only this time, I no longer wanted to simply give up. Once cleared of suspicion, Muking officially moved into the east courtyard for good, no longer needing to hide. Song Yan personally arranged a small position for him within the household, securing his livelihood long term. I watched the servants carrying his belongings into the new courtyard, a heavy, nameless feeling settling over me. Muking was no longer a temporary guest, he had truly become an inseparable part of the Song residence. Song Zhao was overjoyed to learn Muking would be staying for good, running around the residence to tell anyone who would listen. That evening, he begged insistently to sleep in the east courtyard with Muking for a night, and I had to step in to stop him. "You're too young to sleep away from your mother," he pouted, a rare flash of displeasure in his eyes directed at me, and something in my chest sank at the sight. A few days later, I noticed Song Yan visiting the east courtyard often in the evenings, sometimes staying until late before returning to our room. When I asked, he only answered vaguely, discussing household matters. I nodded without pressing, but the suspicion inside me kept quietly growing. That night, I lay awake, straining to catch the sound of footsteps returning from the east courtyard. One afternoon, I happened upon Song Yan personally repairing the eaves of Muking's courtyard, his shirt soaked with sweat, working without pause. The sight stunned me, 6 years married, and I had never once seen him do manual labor for anyone, not even for me. Muking stood beside him, handing him water, the two of them exchanging glances with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. I turned quietly and walked away before they could notice I'd been standing there. That night, the Book of Heavens will reveal a line that chilled me to the core. As the day of fate draws near, the husband spends ever more time with the one who will replace her than with the lady. I sat alone in the dark, hugging my knees, wondering for the first time whether it was my own 6 years of coldness and control that had pushed Song Yan toward Muking, or whether this truly was an inescapable fate exactly as the book foretold. The next morning, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of avoiding Muking, I joined him to prepare breakfast for the whole family. Muking seemed surprised but went along cheerfully, and the two of us chatted over small, idle things while cooking. When I carried the tray out, Song Yan looked at the sight of us walking in together, a flicker of surprise, and something else I couldn't quite read, crossing his face. Breakfast that morning was livelier than usual. Song Zhao chattered about his lessons, turning now and then to share with both me and Muking. I felt a strange warmth settle over the table, as though for the first time in 6 years, our family was truly sitting together at ease. Across the table, Song Yan's lips curved into a rare, faint smile that I nearly missed. But the joy didn't last. The following afternoon, I overheard 2 servants whispering in the kitchen. "The lady's gotten awfully close with young Master Muking lately, she might end up with a reputation." I stood frozen behind the door as if doused with cold water. My attempt at closeness had been twisted into something else entirely, making all my efforts seem worthless, worse than worthless. That night, Song Yan suddenly confronted me about the rumor spreading through the household, his voice colder than usual. "What exactly is going on between you and Muking?" I froze. I hadn't expected the very man so close to Muking himself to be the first to suspect me. I tried to explain, but the words caught in my throat, and the harder I tried, the more it sounded like an excuse. Song Yan looked at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Late that night, I sat alone rereading the Book of Heaven's Will, a new line taunting me. This misunderstanding will push the lady closer to the edge of ruin than ever before. I laughed bitterly. No matter how hard I tried to change, fate kept dragging me back toward the same path. I buried my face in my pillow. For the first time since the omen first appeared, I truly felt helpless before my own destiny. The next morning, Muking came to see me, his expression guilty. I heard about yesterday. I'm sorry my presence has caused you trouble, my lady. I looked at him, a question I'd never dared voice rising in me. Muking, do you have feelings for the general? Muking froze, a flash of confusion crossing his face before he could hide it, leaving me more uncertain than ever what to believe. Muking lowered his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I only know how grateful I am. I haven't let myself think any further than that. The evasive answer left my heart heavy, not from jealousy, but from realizing that even he hadn't fully faced whatever he truly felt. Just then, Song Zhao burst in, his face pale with panic. Mother, father's hurt. He's at the front gate. I ran for the front gate as fast as I could, my heart in chaos. Song Yan leaned against the gatepost, his shoulder soaked in blood, his face pale but his eyes still trying to reassure everyone around him. It's only a minor wound, don't make a fuss. His voice was weaker than usual. I caught him, my hands shaking uncontrollably, every trace of our earlier misunderstanding forgotten. Nothing mattered now but the fear gripping me for the man in front of me. The physician arrived in haste, diagnosing a deep sword wound from an ambush on the road home, though Song Yan had narrowly avoided a fatal strike. I sat by his bed all night, changing his bandages and tending to him myself without leaving his side. Muking stood outside the door, worried but not daring to enter, keeping watch quietly alongside Song Zhao, who had cried himself to sleep in a chair. At midnight, Song Yan stirred in a feverish daze, gripping my hand tightly, murmuring my name without realizing it. Jiying, don't go. I froze, my heart pounding at the unexpected words. Perhaps in his pain, the truest words slipped out before he could hide them. I gripped his hand tighter, tears falling, not sure whether to feel joy at hearing my name or grief at realizing he had never once said such words to me while conscious. The next morning, once Song Yan was more alert, I asked about the attack. He frowned, his voice low. Someone targeted me over the matter of clearing the Moo family's name. I suspect it's tied to an old faction at court. Hearing this, a chill ran through me. Helping Muking hadn't merely been a matter of gratitude. It had dragged the entire Song household into a danger far greater than I'd ever imagined. When Muking heard the news, he dropped to his knees before Song Yan's bed, tears streaming down his face. This is all my fault for endangering you, General. I'll leave the residence at once so as not to cause further trouble. Song Yan forced himself upright, his voice firm. Leaving now would be handing yourself to the enemy. Staying here is safer. I watched, torn between hoping Muking would leave and worrying over Song Yan's insistence on keeping him. That night, the Book of Heavens will appeared with an urgency I'd never seen before. In 7 days, one wrong decision will drive the lady from the Song household forever. I read it, my whole body going cold. Time was running out faster than I'd thought, everything hurtling toward its climax. I looked at Song Yan sleeping fitfully on the bed, wondering whose wrong decision it would be, and whether I could stop it in time. 3 days later, Song Yan had recovered somewhat but was still weak, resting in his room. While he slept, I stepped out for air and happened to overhear a conversation between his mother, the dowager, visiting from the countryside, and Song Yan, just as he'd woken. You should consider taking Muking as a secondary wife. After all, he did save your life. I froze behind the curtain, my heart nearly stopping at those words. I didn't wait to hear Song Yan's answer, turning and fleeing back to my room, unable to hold back my tears any longer. So this was it. The thing I had feared all along was coming true, not because Song Yan meant to cast me aside, but because his own family wanted to push me down to make room for Muking. I sank to the floor, holding myself, feeling as though the whole world were collapsing around me. The next morning, I decided to pack a few belongings, planning to take Song Zhao to my mother's family to escape whatever decision Song Yan was about to make. Just as I stepped into the courtyard, I ran into Song Zhao playing with Muking, his bright laughter stopping me in my tracks. If I left now, I might lose my only child to someone else entirely, exactly as the Book of Heavens will had warned from the very start. Song Yan appeared behind me without my noticing, his voice low. "Where are you going with your things packed, my lady?" I turned, fighting back tears, my voice trembling. "I overheard what your mother said. I don't want to be in anyone's way." Song Yan froze, an expression crossing his face I had never seen before. Not anger, but real, genuine alarm at the thought that I might actually leave. "You've misunderstood, Em." Song Yan gripped my shoulders, his voice urgent in a way I'd rarely heard. "I refused my mother's suggestion the moment she made it. I've never once considered bringing anyone else into this household." I stood frozen, hardly daring to believe my own ears. But just as my heart began to soften, the Book of Heavens will flickered once more with a final haunting line. "A promise made today, will it still hold tomorrow?" That night, the Dowager came to see me personally, her manner far sterner than usual. "I know you overheard what I said this morning, but this is a matter for the entire family. It is not yours to interfere with." I stood in silence, unsure how to respond to the pressure from my elder. Just then, Song Yan walked in, stepping between us, his voice more resolute than I had ever heard. "Mother, matters within this household are mine to decide." The Dowager glared at Song Yan, her voice sharp. "You would defy your own mother for a lady who has never even given this family another child." Song Yan didn't back down, his voice still firm. "I have only one wife. There is nothing more to discuss." The Dowager fell silent for a long moment before finally turning and sweeping away, casting one sharp glance toward Muking standing quietly in the corner of the yard. I stood still, my heart still pounding from the words Song Yan had just spoken. That night, Muking came to see me, his expression unusually solemn. "I want you to know, my lady, what I feel for the general is nothing more than gratitude for saving my life, nothing else." I looked at him, believing him fully for the first time. "I think of both you and the general as the only family I have left in this world," he added, his voice breaking. I nodded, a deep relief washing over me as I finally understood that the greatest threat had never truly come from Muking at all. A few days later, Song Yan's trusted men uncovered that the mastermind behind the assassination attempt was Lu Kang, the current chancellor, the very man who had falsely accused the Moo family 10 years ago to cover up his own corruption. Muking's survival was the greatest threat to exposing his old crime. Hearing this, Song Yan clenched his fist. So he is the one who truly needs to be dealt with, not the Moo family. That very night, a group of assassins broke into the east courtyard, targeting Muking and Song Zhao as they played in the yard. I screamed a warning and rushed to pull Song Zhao into my arms, my heart pounding fit to burst. Muking narrowly dodged a sword strike and fell to the ground. The clash of blades rang out across the residence, servants scattering in panic as the entire east courtyard descended into chaos. Song Yan arrived just in time, drawing his sword to cut off the lead assassin, his movements sharp despite his still healing wound. I held Song Zhao close as he sobbed, my heart clenching with every strike Song Yan exchanged in the fray. In the end, the assassins were driven off, but Song Yan collapsed from blood loss, his shoulder once again soaked red before my eyes. That night, when Song Yan woke in his room, he looked at me with an exhaustion and sincerity I had never seen before. Just now, the only thing I feared was losing you and JR. I froze, tears spilling over before I could stop them. In 6 years, I had never once heard him speak the words. Afraid of losing for my sake, I gripped his hand tight, my voice shaking. "Don't be so reckless again." I know I've been distant with you for years, Song Yan continued, his voice heavy with guilt. But not a single day passed that I didn't think of you. I simply never knew how to say it. I broke into tears, years of buried hurt dissolving all at once. I felt the same. I liked you from the very first day I married into this family. I was only afraid of being rejected, so I hid behind arrogance instead. The two of us gripped each other's hands tightly in the quiet of the night. The next morning, Song Zhao crept into the room and at the sight of his parents holding hands, burst into tears and threw himself into my arms. I was so scared, I was scared you'd leave, like when you packed your things. I held him close, feeling for the first time the full, genuine love my son held for me. Mother isn't going anywhere. Mother loves you so much. Song Yan watched the two of us embrace, his own eyes reddening, a rare sight indeed. The whole family gathered for breakfast, the warmth in the air unlike anything we'd shared in 6 years. Muking sat beside Song Zhao, occasionally sharing a cheerful story that had the whole table laughing. I looked around, a strange sense of peace filling me. The family I had once feared was on the verge of falling apart now felt more bonded than ever, simply because everyone had finally dared to speak the truth. Song Yan decided to lay a trap to capture Lu Kang, relying on old evidence of corruption he had quietly gathered over years in the military. Muking volunteered to act as bait, despite both our worries for his safety. This is my only chance to clear my parents' name. Please let me do my part. Muking said, a determination in his eyes I had never seen before. On the fateful night, Muking arranged a meeting with one of Lu Kang's subordinates at a quiet tavern, while Song Yan and his soldiers lay in ambush nearby. I stayed home with Song Zhao, my heart burning with worry as I waited for news. Near the second watch, the sound of hooves thundered up to the gate. Song Yan returned, his face full of relief. It's done. Lu Kang has been captured along with all the evidence. The next morning, news spread through the capital that Lu Kang had been stripped of his title and imprisoned for corruption and false accusation against a loyal official. The Moo family was fully and publicly exonerated, their honor restored. Muking knelt before an altar facing his homeland, weeping openly, the years-long weight of injustice finally lifted. I watched from a distance, my own eyes welling up in shared joy. That night, sitting alone at my desk, I realized it had been a long while since I'd last seen the Book of Heavens will appear. I closed my eyes and tried to focus as I always had, but the space before me stayed empty, not a single sign appeared. Perhaps now that fate had truly changed, the Book of Destiny no longer had any reason to exist. I smiled faintly, feeling as though a great weight I'd carried for so long had finally lifted. But that very night, one final line unexpectedly appeared, no longer blood red, but shifted to a warm gold. The Book of Heavens will hereby withdraws its former prophecy, a person's fate is not fixed, but shaped by the choices of their own heart. Reading it, tears fell freely down my face. All this time, it hadn't been the book that saved me. It was the change within my own heart that had truly rewritten my fate. The next morning, Song Yan held a small gathering, inviting a few close officials to witness him formally recognizing Muking as his sworn brother, while also declaring before everyone the deep feelings he had long held for me. The old rumors about Muking and myself dissolved completely. Standing beside Song Yan, I felt for the first time how truly secure my place as lady of the Song household had become. The dowager attended the gathering as well, her manner far softer than before. She took my hand, her voice a touch sheepish. I was short-sighted before. I hope you won't hold it against me. I smiled and shook my head, no trace of resentment left in me. Song Zhao ran up to tug at his grandmother's sleeve, chattering happily about his lessons, filling the gathering with even greater warmth. All past friction wiped away. A few months later, Muking decided to move into a small residence near the Song estate, close enough to visit often, far enough to avoid any further misunderstandings. On the day he left, Song Zhao cried, reluctant to see him go. Muking ruffled his hair and promised to visit every week. I watched the tearful farewell, silently grateful that everything had finally come to a gentle resolution for everyone involved. The following spring, the Song residents held a birthday celebration for the dowager, guests filling the halls. I stood beside Song Yan, greeting our visitors, no trace left of the insecurity I'd once carried as a new bride. Song Zhao ran about the courtyard playing with the other children, his laughter ringing through the residence. Muking was there too, bringing a gift he'd prepared himself, the warmth of family more complete than ever. As the celebration wound down, the three of us sat together in the small courtyard beneath the moonlight. Song Zhao lay with his head in my lap, chattering endlessly about school. Song Yan sat beside me, gently holding my hand, his eyes soft in a way he rarely allowed himself to show. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling, at last, the peace I had never dared to imagine 6 years ago, even though I had once stood so close to it without realizing. That night, I sat quietly gazing at the moonlight through the window, thinking back over the entire journey since the first night those red characters had appeared. I smiled softly, not to forget, but to remind myself that I had once dared to change for the people I loved. Song Yan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around me, whispering, "What are you smiling about all by yourself?" I shook my head and rested against his shoulder. "Nothing, just thinking how lucky I am." A year later, Song Zhao had grown taller, calling me mother in front of everyone now without a trace of the hesitance he once had. He often told his friends about his family with unmistakable pride. Standing in the kitchen preparing dinner, I listened to him laughing with his father out in the yard, a simple happiness rising in me that I had never known how to appreciate before. Song Yan stepped into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What smells so good? My lady grows more skilled by the day." I laughed and pushed him away gently, afraid Song Zhao might catch us in tease, but every time he called me my lady. In that tender tone, my heart still fluttered as though it were the very first day of our love. By the end of that year, Muking married a young nobleman he'd met through his visits to the Song residence, their affection blossoming naturally, to everyone's surprise. Our whole family attended the wedding, watching Muking find happiness at last, the old weight of injustice now nothing more than a story from the past. I watched, quietly glad he had finally found his own peaceful harbor after so much turmoil. On the night of Muking's wedding, Song Zhao fell asleep in my arms on the ride home. Song Yan sat across from us in the carriage, gently smoothing our son's hair, his eyes soft as he looked at the two of us. Seeing him sleep so peacefully reminds me of when he was still so small, so afraid whenever he saw you. I smiled, no trace of hurt left in remembering the past, for the present was more than enough to make up for everything. As spring arrived, the Song residents held a lantern festival, and the whole family went out together to enjoy it. Song Zhao held both our hands as we walked through the crowd, the glow of lanterns lighting up all three of our faces. I looked up at Song Yan and caught him already watching me. We simply smiled at each other, needing no words, our understanding now a language all its own. On the way home, Song Yan suddenly stopped in the middle of a bridge, pulling me close, his voice serious despite the festive noise around us. 6 years ago, I failed to say this at the right time. I want to say it again now, properly. I love you, Jiying. For the rest of my life, there will be no one but you. I froze amid the passing crowd, tears of happiness spilling over as I nodded, unable to find words. Song Zhao stood beside us, watching his parents embrace on the bridge, and broke into giggles before throwing his arms around us both. "I love you too, father and mother, so much." The three of us held each other beneath the glowing lanterns, laughter mingling with the festive noise around us. I closed my eyes and let myself savor the moment, thinking that though the Book of Heavens had once written a tragic ending for me, I had now written a different one with my own hands, one far more beautiful than any prophecy. Years later, once Song Zhao had grown into an adult, he would sometimes still hear me tell the story of the strange book that had once appeared in his mother's life. He always laughed and said it was probably just a long dream. I only smiled and said nothing, because I knew better than anyone that whether it had been dream or reality, that one moment of daring to change had given me the whole, complete family I deserved for the rest of my life. For 6 years, Jiying made her husband kneel to put on her shoes and made their 5-year-old son serve her tea each morning without daring to complain, only changing her ways out of fear of the prophecy foretelling her downfall. Some would say that once someone has truly changed, has sincerely made amends, they deserve the full forgiveness and love the ending gave her. But others would argue that without that fateful red omen, would Jiying ever have let go of her pride at all? Or would the next 6 years have simply repeated the same old cycle? Which side are you on?